What happens when a U.S. president tells Israel no? For decades, Washington has backed Israel with near-unquestioned loyalty, military aid, diplomatic cover, and political support. Yet in 2020, something remarkable happened. Donald J. Trump, a man hailed by many as Israel's strongest ally in the White House, suddenly drew a red line. He told Benjamin Netanyahu, "Do not annex the West Bank." Why would the same president who moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, who recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, now slam on the brakes? Was this an act of principle, a calculation of politics, or something more surprising, a glimpse into Trump's own deal-making instincts? Before we dive deeper into this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of these eye-opening insights from around the world. Picture this paradox. Trump had handed Israel victories American presidents before him wouldn't dare touch. The Jerusalem embassy move alone with seismic symbolic recognition that Washington saw the holy city not as a contested capital, but as Israel's eternal and undivided seat of power. The decision sent shockwaves through the Arab world and drew outrage from Palestinians, who saw East Jerusalem as the heart of their future state. Then came another bold stroke, recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, territory captured from Syria in 1967 and long deemed occupied by international law. Each move told Netanyahu, this president is different. This president delivers. And in return, Trump's administration became beloved by the Israeli right, even as it infuriated much of the international community. So when 2020 arrived, and Netanyahu faced political pressure at home, annexing swaths of the West Bank seemed within reach. Here was the chance to fulfill a decades-long dream of the Israeli right, absorbing settlements into Israel proper, cementing control over land Palestinians claimed for their future state. For Netanyahu, it was a historic opening. For Trump, it was a problem. Why? That's the mystery. Why would a president who had given Israel everything suddenly draw the line here? Some say it wasn't about the Palestinians at all. Trump rarely spoke with empathy about their plight. Instead, it may have been about the bigger picture, his so-called deal of the century. Jared Kushner, his son-in-law and senior advisor, was the architect of a sweeping vision: normalize Israel's relations with Arab states, bypass Palestinian leaders, and redraw the political map of the Middle East. Annexation, however, threatened to blow up the entire plan. Imagine the domino effect. If Israel moved forward with annexation, Arab states that had quietly signaled interest in making peace, like the United Arab Emirates, would be forced to back away. The European Union was already warning of sanctions. The United Nations condemned the idea as a violation of international law. Even US allies in the Gulf, who had grown weary of Palestinian leadership but still tied themselves to the Palestinian cause in public, could not openly embrace Israel if annexation went ahead. Trump understood this. Chaos would not help his re-election campaign, which was already facing the storm of a global pandemic. What he needed was a foreign policy win, a grand bargain he could tout to voters. Annexation threatened to burn the very bridge he was trying to build. And so, in an extraordinary twist, Trump told Netanyahu, "Stop, don't annex. Not now." But he didn't phrase it as a rejection. In true Trumpian style, he reframed it as a bigger, better deal. The carrot was irresistible. If Israel froze annexation, the United Arab Emirates would normalize relations. That promise gave birth to the Abraham Accords, the first major peace agreement between Israel and an Arab state in decades. Soon, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco followed. It was a trade-off. Israel shelved annexation ambitions for new in exchange for diplomatic victories that reshaped the region. Trump got his foreign policy triumph. Netanyahu got recognition from new Arab partners. And the Palestinians, they were left out in the cold, sidelined in a way not seen since the Oslo Accords. But here's the suspense. Was Trump's opposition to annexation truly a stand on principle, or just another deal-making tactic? Did he really believe annexation was wrong, or did he simply calculate that the timing would cost him the larger prize? Consider this. In private conversations, officials close to Trump suggested he never fully abandoned the idea. Annexation, they hinted, wasn't dead, only delayed. Once peace deals were secured, perhaps the U.S. would look the other way again. For Netanyahu, that was enough. He could tell his right-wing base that annexation was still on the table, while enjoying the fruits of normalization. For Trump, it was the art of the deal. He had created suspense, tension, and leverage, and in his eyes, that meant power. Yet this story leaves us with haunting questions. What did this moment really mean for U.S. policy in the Middle East? Was it a turning point, showing that even Israel's closest ally had limits? Or was it simply another chapter in a saga where Palestinians are promised hope, only to see it traded away for political convenience? One thing is clear: Trump, the unlikely figure to push back on Israeli ambitions, did so not out of compassion but out of calculation. Annexation was a red line, not because it was unjust, but because it threatened the bigger show, the Abraham Accords. But as history often reminds us, every deal comes with a cost. And in this case, the cost was the silence of Palestinians, watching as their land and their future were once again negotiated without their presence at the table. So, was Trump the first American president to truly say no to Israel, or was he simply saying, not yet? That question would hang in the air, unanswered, as the Abraham Accords were signed with great fanfare on the White House lawn, and, as cameras flashed and leaders shook hands, one could not help but wonder, was this peace, or just the calm before the next storm? The West Bank, a strip of land smaller than New Jersey at its soil, carries the weight of centuries, and its future could ignite the entire Middle East. For Israel, it is strategic territory. For Palestinians, it is home, the cradle of their hopes for statehood. And for the world, it is the ticking heart of one of the most explosive conflicts of our time. But here's the burning question. What would annexation of the West Bank really mean? To understand, we have to go back to 1967. In just 6 days of war, Israel captured territory that would redefine the region: the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza, East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, and the West Bank. Since then, the West Bank has remained under military occupation, a gray zone of international law. Palestinians call it the core of their future state. Israelis, especially settlers, see it as the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria. And so, for over 50 years, life here has been a tug-of-war. Imagine a Palestinian farmer in the hills outside Nablus. His family has cultivated olive groves for generations. Yet every year, those trees inch closer to Israeli settlements, rows of red-tiled houses that rise like fortresses on hilltops, guarded by barbed wire and soldiers. To the farmer, annexation would mean not just the loss of land, but the loss of history. For Israelis who live in those settlements, annexation would mean legitimacy. Recognition that their homes are not temporary outposts but permanent towns. Two families, two narratives, colliding on the same soil. Now pause and ask yourself, what does this land actually look like on the ground? The West Bank is not an empty desert. It is a patchwork of checkpoints, military bases, settlements, and Palestinian villages. Over 2.5 million Palestinians live here, alongside roughly 500,000 Israeli settlers. Roads are segregated. Israeli-plated cars, speeding along highways Palestinians cannot enter, while Palestinian workers line up for hours at military checkpoints just to reach jobs in nearby cities. Annexation, in practical terms, would turn this daily struggle into a permanent condition. Palestinians fear they would be locked in a system that strips them of citizenship, mobility, and sovereignty. International observers warn it would create an apartheid-like reality, where one population enjoys full rights while the other lives under military control. Would this be the death of the two-state solution, the very dream that has defined peace talks for decades? Many argue yes, because once Israel formally annexes land, it signals there is nothing left to negotiate. But annexation isn't just about borders, it's about survival. Take water, for example. In the arid hills of the Jordan Valley, aquifers are precious. Under occupation, Israel controls most of the water supply. Palestinian farmers often find themselves restricted, unable to dig new wells, while nearby settlements enjoy lush irrigation. Imagine annexation cementing this imbalance, turning what is already an unequal system into a legally sanctioned one. Now picture movement. Today, a Palestinian student in Ramallah might wait hours at a checkpoint just to reach her university in Jerusalem. If annexation proceeded, those checkpoints wouldn't vanish, they could multiply. The walls, the permits, the military patrols, all solidified into the architecture of permanent division. So why does this tiny stretch of land matter so much to the world? Because annexation wouldn't just reshape the West Bank, it would ripple far beyond it. Jordan, just across the river, has long warned that annexation would threaten its fragile peace treaty with Israel. Egypt, too, would face fury on its streets, where public opinion still burns with sympathy for the Palestinians. And the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar would be caught in a diplomatic trap. How could they move closer to Israel, as some secretly wished, while Palestinians accused them of betrayal? Annexation, in other words, risked not just unrest, but regional explosion. Could it have sparked a new Intifada uprising like those that shook the Middle East in the late 20th century? Or worse, could it have pushed Arab governments into conflict once again? International law was already clear. The United Nations declared settlements illegal, the occupation a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. European leaders threatened sanctions if annexation went forward. Even US allies whispered warnings in Washington's ear. Yet, Netanyahu pressed ahead, emboldened by years of unwavering American support. And then, suddenly, the red light appeared. Donald Trump, of all people, said, "Not now." The annexation train screeched to a halt. Instead, out of its ashes rose the Abraham Accords, peace agreements between Israel and Arab states that would have been unthinkable just years earlier. But here's the haunting suspense. What if Trump hadn't blocked it? What if annexation had gone forward? Would the West Bank today be a patchwork of disconnected Palestinian enclaves? cut off from one another by annexed Israeli territory. Would we be talking about the end of the Palestinian dream altogether? And deeper still, was Trump's block of annexation a reprieve, or merely a pause button? Because the land remains contested, the settlements continue to expand, and the question of sovereignty still hangs unanswered in the dry air of the West Bank hills. The West Bank, less than the size of New Jersey, yet larger than life itself for millions. It is a place where families count their history in olive trees, where checkpoints dictate the rhythm of daily life, and where every stone tells a story of who belongs and who does not. Annexation was stopped in 2020, but was it stopped forever, or only delayed until the next political storm? That question would linger like smoke on the horizon, as leaders turn from the battlefield of annexation toward the glittering promise of something new. The Abraham Accords. The West Bank crisis had been paused, but the Middle East was still a cauldron simmering with tension. And then came an unexpected twist. The Abraham Accords. Imagine this, the White House lawn bathed in golden sunlight, flags snapping in the breeze. Leaders of Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain stand shoulder to shoulder, smiling for cameras. Hands are shaken. Declarations of peace echo across the world. Headlines call it historic. And yet, beneath the pomp and ceremony, a question hangs in the air. Could real peace come from a deal that sidelines the very people whose land it reshapes? The Abraham Accords were not just a diplomatic breakthrough, they were a gamble. For decades, Arab states had insisted on Palestinian statehood as the condition for normalizing relations with Israel. And yet, here was a deal that bypassed that demand entirely. In exchange for formal recognition, Israel agreed to suspend annexation plans temporarily, but the Palestinians were left out in the cold. Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and the architect of this strategy, had played his hand like a masterful poker player. He promised regional stability, economic cooperation, and the allure of technology, tourism, and investment. In return, the UAE and Bahrain became the first Arab states in decades to openly recognize Israel. Morocco and Sudan followed, signaling a tectonic shift in Middle Eastern diplomacy. But while the world celebrated, millions of Palestinians felt the ground shift beneath them. Could this peace survive without addressing the core issue, their right to a state? Could agreements between governments replace decades of lived experience, daily struggle, and generational trauma? Let's zoom in. Picture a teenager in Gaza scrolling through the newsfeed. His family has lived through 2 intifadas, repeated military incursions, and endless checkpoints. Suddenly, he sees the UAE announcing normalized ties with Israel. Pride, confusion, betrayal, probably all three. For him, the accords are proof that the world can negotiate around Palestinians, but not with them. And yet, the Trump administration framed it as a victory for peace. The media hailed the accords as historic. Netanyahu basked in the glow, touting it as proof that Israel could have a seat at the global table. Trump, ever the showman, called it the deal of the century. But behind the slogans lurked a delicate tension. The accords relied on the suspension of annexation, not its permanent removal. One misstep, one political shift, and the fragile balance could crumble. Think about the geopolitical stakes. For the Gulf states, the accords offered protection against Iran's growing influence, a chance to modernize their economies, and the prestige of being mediators rather than silent observers. For Israel, it was a diplomatic Goldman formal recognition, security guarantees, and a pathway to future alliances. And for the U.S., it was a foreign policy trophy, a story to tout on the eve of a turbulent election year. But peace, as always, is complicated. Palestinians faced a choice: reject the accords and risk further isolation, or accept them and live with the reality that their claims were being sidelined. Jordan and Egypt watched closely, wary of angering their citizens, while still cautiously supporting stability. Even European allies, who had opposed annexation, were forced to recalibrate their approach. And here's the suspense. The Abraham Accords were born out of delay, not resolution. Annexation had been paused, not canceled. Settlements continued to expand. Diplomatic gestures cannot erase fences or checkpoints or decades of mistrust. Every handshake on the White House lawn was a temporary truce in a conflict that had defined generations. Could this fragile new order hold? Or would the next crisis, the spark of unrest in Hebron, Ramallah, or Jerusalem, ignite the tensions all over again? Could a teenager in the West Bank, tired of waiting, become the spark for a conflict that no peace deal could prevent? The accords also redefined alliances in the region. Gulf states that once demanded Palestinian statehood now quietly positioned themselves as brokers of stability. Israel, long isolated in the Arab world, found new partners eager to cooperate on technology, security, and trade. And the U.S., as the ultimate dealmaker, positioned itself at the center of this shifting chessboard. Yet, the human dimension remained unresolved. Palestinians still live under occupation, restricted in movement, with limited access to water, education, and healthcare. The agreements did not dismantle settlements, nor did they address legal rights. In many ways, the accords were a solution for states but not for people. So, As the cameras clicked and speeches were made, the Middle East watched with bated breath. Was this the dawn of a new era, or a temporary pause before the next storm? Could peace be built without justice? And if not, how long before the tensions of the West Bank, Gaza, and beyond spilled into a crisis no accords could contain? The Abraham Accords had changed the game, but the board itself remained volatile. Every handshake, every flag raised in celebration, was a reminder, in the Middle East, peace is fragile, and tomorrow can turn triumph into tragedy. And, as the sun set over Washington, one question lingered over the region like a shadow. The West Bank may have been spared annexation for now, but who would determine its future when the next political storm arrived?